Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Gordon, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks, Ted. How about you?
I'm doing wonderful. I appreciate you taking a few minutes to chat with me today. We're going to talk a little bit about innovation and in legal, and how I came across your name, interestingly, was I did a little experiment with the ILTA roster. I went back 10 years and to take a look and say, 10 years ago, how many titles had the word innovation in them? And turns out the answer was 16. You were one of them. So you're a legal innovation OG. And I compared that with today, and today there are over 300. So that's quite a bit of growth. And so I decided to reach out. We started having a chat, and we just had a great conversation. So I wanted to talk through some topics with you today. But before I do, why don't I let you give an introduction, kind of what your background is, what you're up to today, all that kind of stuff.
Sure. Thanks, Ted. Really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you and have a conversation. Yeah, the main thing people should know about me is for the last 25 years, I've really been focused on helping organizations become smarter. Started out in knowledge management, that kind of morphed into accelerating collaboration, and ended up on the innovation side, moving from, I was at PwC for 6 years, first of all in Canada. I'm a Canadian, and then working globally in the sort of KM collaboration area, and ended there doing innovation. And then I got hired by a major Canadian business law firm to do innovation for them. And for the last 6 years, ending last year, I was working with LexMundi, which is a global network of 150 business law firms. And what I was doing for them is setting up their technology and innovation program. How do you accelerate the uptake by firms of innovative technologies and techniques and approaches? And along the way, I wrote Building Smarter Organizations, which because I noticed, whether I had a previous career in government, I worked at PwC, I worked in law firms, I did a lot of work with nonprofits, and I noticed that everybody had the same problem. The subtitle of the book is How to Lead Your Zombie Organization Back to Life. And I just saw that zombie pattern of behavior everywhere I went. So most recently, I'm really focused on artificial intelligence, governance, and safety. I'm on the board of directors of a Canadian nonprofit focused on that from a sort of policy, legislative advocacy point of view, and yeah, so you're up to date.
Good stuff. So yeah, going back to kind of how we connected and looking at, so the ILTA roster in 2014 had about 17,000 people. And so there were 16 people with innovation in their title. There were no C-level folks. Now that doesn't mean that there were no C-level folks, period, and it also
Right.
doesn't mean that there were only 16 people with innovation roles in legal. It just means on the ILTA roster, the word innovation only came up 16 times, one of which was your role. How did you get into an innovation role so early, and what did the space look like 10 years ago?
Well, like I said, I was at PwC in Canada, and in my last year with them, this is back in 2010, 2011, I spun up the beginnings of the PwC Canada Innovation Program. I left PwC, and there was a Canadian national law firm who deliberately chose someone like me who knew professional services, but wasn't of legal services. I'm not a lawyer. And prior to that, I hadn't worked with law firms or in legal services. So they took they were innovative and took a flyer on me, and I went to work for them, thinking, well, anybody who's willing to step out of their comfort zone like that. And I knew that, listen, hey, accountants like to hire accountants. Lawyers like to hire lawyers. I kind of, I kind of get it, but they were willing to take a flyer on me, and they thought that they could learn a lot from the other professional service firms, and from my, really bringing me in was a way to port over that experience to them. So that's kind of how I got started. And frankly, it was a bit of a rough start for them and for me. Law firms are the same as professional services firms, but they're also different. We should probably talk about that.
Yeah, it's interesting, and they law firms fancy themselves as a profession, which there's some distinguishing factors around that. What's interesting is a previous podcast guest, Dave Bolin. He's client, good friend at Ogletree Deacons. He also came from accounting. He came from um, what's the name of the firm? It'll come to me in a minute, but no legal background. Grant Thornton, and
Right.
he came in and really he's tripled the size of the organization. So they went from low 20s to, I think, close to 80 people, and doing some really interesting things. So I've seen it work out well when outsiders come in with a fresh perspective and ideas from other industries and apply that. So I would imagine, the same was true with you. You were able to bring some of that perspective to the table.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that's true. I've thought a lot about how lawyers and law firms are the same and how they're different. So I wrote my book, as I mentioned, because I saw the same pattern, regardless of whether you were private sector or non-private sector, government, leaders and organizations really are optimized to do what they did last year, plus or minus 2 or 3% next year. The leaders get selected because they're good at running the existing organization and everybody trusts them not to mess that up. And the problem with innovation, if you're going to do anything beyond sort of incremental, everybody loves incremental improvements, shave 2% off costs, find 1% here or there, everybody loves that stuff. But, if you're talking about AI, which, we definitely need to, this is when you touch AI, you're starting to, and most legal tech of any real note is starting to pull apart your business model, your pricing model, your client relationship model, your internal firm compensation model, and that makes people very, very uncomfortable because for 50 years, law firms, business law firms, and business lawyers have been very, 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 very successful, with you know, margin and increasing revenue that just blows any other professional service firm out of the water. So, they're very, very, very successful in the current model. And it's very, very challenging for them to think about stepping out of it. And this is kind of where you get into there's lawyers and law firms are the same as everybody else, and everybody thinks they're special. Accountants think they're special. Engineers think they're special. What's different about law is there's two fundamental differences between lawyers and law firms and every other professional service firm. Number one is in most jurisdictions around the world, and as I said, I used to work with 150 law firms around the world. Most lawyers have a professional, most law societies or equivalent bar associations have professional standards that require lawyers to be able to serve their clients first, and therefore the law firm cannot have a claim to them. Any lawyer, in North America can basically pick up sticks, set up their own firm tomorrow or move to a different firm, and there's no holdback. At PwC, at any engineering firm, that's absolutely not true. Partners there are facing a minimum 2-year non-compete along with other financial penalties. So no partner ever leaves one of the big firms. They just don't. It's too expensive. It's crazy. So you have this workforce that you need to deliver the work, but who could pick up sticks at any point in time. And that's very different. And that means I work for a managing partner, and he said, listen, I operate in two markets at the same time, which I need to match up: the market for talent and the market for clients. And any one of them can leave at any minute. And so that is quite a different model than any corporate structure or any other professional service firm. The other thing that's different about lawyers and law firms is that legal structures, legal systems differ fairly significantly, even within national boundaries. Louisiana oil leases are quite different than other one because of their historical structures. But certainly, if you move between countries, they're very different, and that means that the legal services market at a transnational level is very fragmented and will always remain that. Accountants, they're a globally the name, the answer is in the name, globally accepted accounting standards. You can be an accountant pretty well anywhere. The tax code is definitely going to be different, but that gets you into quasi legal stuff. So you have this very fragmented market, and you have this very fragile relationship between the organizing entity, the firm, and the lawyers, and that's what makes lawyers and law firms quite different, and changes the nature of the relationship with clients as well. But anyways, that's so you can bring in a lot of thinking from professional services firms. You can do a direct import on a lot of that stuff, but the organizational leadership challenges are much greater for law firms than in other professional services firms, I would argue.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit about why law firms struggle with innovation. But before we do, you and I had a conversation about why not to be a KM or innovation
Yeah.
leader in legal. And, I have some thoughts on that. But I want to hear what your thinking is. I think you even had a LinkedIn post about this. Tell us a little about
Yeah.
that.
I don't know. It's quite a long way, but the post was something like, uh, uh, advice to new knowledge management managers. Don't become a KM person. And I think the equivalent is with innovation. It's no route to glory. You're not going to get paid particularly well. The IT guys always get paid more than you. It's difficult. You're going to frustrate people, and you're going to irritate them. So, don't do it. And then I ended by saying, but if you like to have an impact like almost no one else in an organization can have, if you like to deal with complex and ambiguous and challenging questions that lead to that impact, if you like working across silos and functions, to do good KM, you need to understand IT and security and privacy, and you need to understand user experience and information architecture, and you need to understand document management systems, and you need to understand psychology and social behavior. You need to understand politics. Like the reason why it's so difficult, but I would argue so fun, if you like that kind of thing, not everybody does, is that there are very few roles that where you are asked to work across silos in a novel area. 99% of the people in your organization work within a role, within a silo, within a known bound of set of questions. So you have to like the really hard, complex stuff, and you have to do it on its own merits rather than expect to win glory and fame and fortune. What's your answer, Ted?
Yeah. Well, so I see the reasons why you might not want to be a KM and specifically innovation leader is legal is one of the least innovative industries on the planet, and for a whole host of reasons. Um, I Floor and I talked about it on the last episode, but I've been
Mm,
challenged before. Like the legal is not one of the least innovative, and I was like, well, let's talk about some data. How about new technology investment? That's most innovation. There is a technology component. Not all. I'm a Lean Six Sigma black belt and did process engineering and improvement in financial services for 10 years. And there were plenty of scenarios back then where technology did not have a central role, but
mm,
most these days do. And Tech investment, in my opinion, is a key indicator of the level of innovation of an industry, and it historically has been low. The good news is I think that's changing. I think Chat GPT scared the pants off of people in legal when that Goldman
Yeah.
report came out and said whatever it was, 55% of legal tasks can be automated by AI. And so I think that is changing that appetite and willingness to spend. I think that is starting to change. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about that, and I agree. Tech spending is a good measure. What's interesting about that is that the price point for technology compared to the quality and feature set has been dropping precipitously. It is just way cheaper and way easier to start with technology. So I think back in the you know buy your search. I remember the days when if I wanted to do an enterprise search, I did 3 different enterprise search installs, and you had to get money to buy the servers, and you had to get them to ship them to you, and you had to get the guys to configure them, and then you had to blah blah blah, went on and on. And nowadays you can rent what you need on demand. So I think that may have been a better measure than it is now, because it's actually you can buy more and get more today. Um, just a little side note on that. I used to argue that there ought to be, for any IT project, particularly one, there's IT projects related to you know, revamping existing systems. We need to do a new financial system. But for other systems like KM or innovation, if you're applying technology, you should have a budget where you are spending at least as much on the implementation, the change management, the rollout, and the post implementation support as you're spending on the actual technology. And then people would say, oh my God, we're going to double the price of the projects. I said, well, either that or you're going to do half the number of projects. And I would say either one is better, because you're going to have much better, you're going to be much tighter on your choosing the projects you're going to do given the limited funnel. And the second thing is you're going to have much better implementations. And that's where most of that IT spend, people buy a tool. We've all seen it over and over again. Buy a too fancy tool, spend $1 million on it, and then 2 years later, a rump of people are using it and it didn't go anywhere. And that's because people didn't think through the pricing model. They didn't think through the business model. They didn't think through the impact on the client relationship model. They didn't consider, how lawyers would actually experience it.
I beat this drum so often.
Go,
TCO.
go ahead.
Yeah, TCO, total cost of ownership. Your
Yeah.
initial development and implementation is a fraction of your total cost of ownership. And the reason is that is a discrete activity. It has a beginning and it has an end. Your ongoing maintenance, support, training, that goes on for the entire life cycle of the platform that you're implementing. That never goes away until you retire the system or transition to
Yeah.
something else. But so often, like, we used to be a custom dev shop, and we would time and materials consulting, PwC and the big consulting firms do a lot of this kind of work as well. And we transitioned because there were so many instances where we would deploy an amazing brand new legal internet, and it would get dropped in IT's lap. They wouldn't know how. Usually we engage with KM. IT wouldn't be prepared to support it. There would be limited training resources available, and the project would suffer. So we made the decision, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago. We're like, we got to fix this. And that's
Right.
why we decided to go down the product path where we have, training resources. We have a predictable cost and implementation. We have a maturity model that we guide customers through. We never had that as consultants when you're doing custom dev. And you're
Right.
1,000% right. That piece of the TCO equation so often gets grossly underestimated.
But that's a perfect example of how every organization is basically set up to function, to repeat yesterday, tomorrow. I went, I had this early conversation with CFO at an organization I won't name. And I newly arrived in the organization, and I got I needed to submit a budget proposal for the next financial year. And I looked at the material, and it was the same as, I've done this in many places. And I went to the director and I said, hey, it looks like the basis for budgeting is historical spend, and the purpose of the budgeting process is to manage costs. Given, and she said, yeah, that's pretty accurate. Yeah, we look back, we give you 3 years worth of spend, and, we're asking you to look ahead and tell us what you're going to spend next year. And yeah, we're trying to like always manage costs. I said, okay, you do get I'm director of innovation. You do get that really my job is to invent something that's never really been invented before, that might save money, but really ideally generates new value that we have never had before. So, like, how does your budgeting process, and oh, by the way, that value might be generated in year 2 or year 3, because it'll take us a year to get stuff set up and get it going, and, blah, blah, blah. So it's really, your 1 year budgeting process looking retrospectively focused on cost is completely contrary. And this is getting us into why law firms are challenged with innovation, but all organizations are challenged. And she said, yeah, I know, Gordon, but you still have to fill out the spreadsheet. The particular problem for law firms is that, like other professional services firms with a partnership structure, but law I've never seen it as bad in law firms as I ever saw in the accounting and other professional services firm. It's a cash business. It is, we make money this year, we spend money this year, the partners all want all of their money out at the end of the year, and we start the next year basically from zero. And if you go to the partners and say, well, we're going to spend in year 1 and we'll break even in year 2 and we'll make money in year 3, it is just really impossible for them to, most of the time, get their heads around that. And that's that's a barrier for any professional services firms. The partners want their money out, but the other firms have for other reasons have realized that they need sort of multi-year notion of financing investments in new approaches.
Yeah, I mean, in what scenario, in what business could you possibly take such a short-term perspective on ROI? Like, most initiatives, even hiring people, I mean, you got a 3 to
Yeah.
6 month ramp up time, and maybe the second 6 months of the first year, they're making up for the sunk cost in the first half. So your best case scenario, break even on a resource in the first year. Technology investments, to your point, they take years sometimes to recoup, and they're, in addition to that budgeting short-sightedness, there's also the scenario where a lot of law firm leadership, executive committees, are older partners and they have a retirement horizon. And if the proposal that you're putting forward, the break even exceeds their retirement horizon, why would you vote for it? This is gonna cost me money, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, law firms are really, cash businesses. I wrote a blog post about how they're sort of like pirates, and that the pirates would get on a ship at the beginning of the year, sail around, collect money, and at the end of the year they would dock and distribute all the money. The pirates are so successful, it doesn't really matter about the sails or the cannons or how quick the ship is. So they don't need a strategy. And and I argue, but I've been, going back to the original question about why should people, do, innovation in law firms. I went over to the law firm at the time because I was very excited to have a front row seat in what I thought was going to be a transformation of an industry that has a particular role to play in society. And I was really, really excited about that. Now, my timing was clearly off, since the other shoe is yet to drop. The, inflection point on the S curve hasn't hit, but I would still advise someone that if you were offered an innovation role today and, it was a choice for you, I would say, what, I think there's, in the next 5 years, things are going to be profoundly different. I have been wrong for the last 10 years. So, that's take that as you will. But, I keep thinking, you have to be optimistic when you're doing innovation in any organization. So I keep thinking, change is around the corner. And, I read a study recently that said that, large language models are increasing in capacity faster than Moore's law is for chip design.
Hmm.
Every 8 months there's a doubling of capability, and that is really going to wrought incredible changes in many parts of the world and organizations, and particularly law firms. Um, so yeah, I mean, the other point I wanted to connect with is on the question of senior partners. Absolutely right. It's partly the money. And you have to remember that there's nothing for a senior partner that has the exit sign in front of them. There's they're incented to make as much money in hand before they leave, because they don't really have any equity remaining in the firm after they leave. There's no, they're not relying on anything of the firm. So, just from a personal financial point of view, they're highly incented to maximize their return in year. My thought is, so there's that, but also I don't think you should underestimate how painful it is for people that have worked in a certain way for 20 or 30, even 40 years, to ask them to, as I said, with new legal tech, work with their clients in a different way, work with a different incentive system, work learning something new. It's actually, and there's science around this, it's actually physically painful to do that. And so unless they're wired to enjoy that, it's really painful for them. I sometimes think it's less the money and more just the disruption that they're not interested in. And so the real engine of change in most law firms most of the time is those mid-career partners who have been partners long enough to get how the firm works and have some credibility amongst the other partners, but they own the 10 plus year horizon for the firm. They can, and I had lunch recently with a friend of mine who's a senior partner there. He's right on the cusp there. And he said, you know, I might be able to coast out of here, but he said, it's pretty clear to me that, this model is not going to last much longer than 10 years. And I said, well, what has the firm done to engage those partners in that conversation about what needs to change, and how do you maneuver the partnership to make the changes and make the investments and start driving things a little bit differently. And the answer is, there's I talked to a managing partner that day, and he said, I know we need to have these conversations. I just don't know how to have them. And I think it goes back to that point I made earlier about the fragility of the partnership model and the ability of lawyers and partners to leave at any moment.
1,000%. And the squeaky wheel ends up getting the grease.
And the squeaky
Um,
wheel ends up getting the creative. Yeah, the white middle-aged man who complains the most, and people don't want to upset things. And and like,
yeah,
what is it? Machiavelli. I love Machiavelli. He figured all this out 500 years ago. He said there's nothing more difficult than the introduction of a new order of things, and that is partly because uh, anyone who might support you will only give you lukewarm support at best, because they've never seen this thing that you're going to do. So they don't until they've experienced it, they can't really say, Yahoo, gung ho, let's go for it. And of course, those that are doing well under the existing system, and by doing well, I would include being comfortable in the current mode. He says, quote unquote, we'll fight you like partisans. They will hang on tenaciously to the current model because it's so uncomfortable for humans to be, cast adrift. Most people, most of the time, like a certain rhythm and routine, um, and it's psychologically very disturbing for them to contemplate something new.
Yeah. Well, think about all the incentives that we're talking about here in opposition to innovation. We've got the scenario that you talked about, the natural physical resistance to it. You've got the financial challenges, right? With, again, cashing out every year, having that very short ROI horizon perspective. Um, and then you also have competing demands. So what is my ability to absorb this change that you're going to throw at me? Can I still get my 2,000 hours a month? I'm sorry, a
Right.
year. If I can't, like, how willing am I going to be uh, to come to the table? And by the way, you mentioned something about being wrong about, don't feel like the Lone Ranger. 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I did 22 ILTA road shows, all in different cities, talking about SharePoint Online and moving to Microsoft 365. And I was like,
Yeah.
it's going to happen any day now.
Yeah.
It's going to happen any day. And it's just now happening 11 years later. It happened in other industries 7, 8 years ago in earnest. But, the AmLaw firms are really just now moving um, their infrastructure and retiring that on-prem footprint. So yeah, I was wrong
Well,
too.
yeah. I mean, we have COVID and Microsoft 365 that combination. I think has really made it number one clear about the need to do that and the value of operating in a more digitally space, and Microsoft moving to the cloud. 365 has made it much easier for most law firms to swallow it. What they're doing though, and what irritates the hell out of me, is that they're replicating their current environment, the in-office on-prem, and they're simply porting it into the cloud without rethinking how is it that we might configure ourselves, configure our relationships. People say, well, we need people in the office because we need to do mentoring, and serendipitous network building is so important to new associates. And I say, yeah, I get on-prem works really well for that, but there are at least 10 different ways you can do that in a digital environment, uh, to either as a replacement or an enhancement or an alternative to the in-person stuff. By the way, that now means you have a talent pool that, around the world, virtually, whoever is able to meet the requirements of your local, bar association. And you can tap into this much wider pool of talent. But you need to rethink uh, how you do those things. And there's lots of different ways to do that. But you know, God bless them, they're moving into the cloud. But they're saying, well, it's not really working, and that's because they took on-prem thinking and put it in the cloud. But I appreciate you're saying, there's a bunch of us. We run into each other. We recognize each other right away. Yeah, it's a long time coming. And what is it they say about systems look hard uh, until the moment when they change, and then when they change, it turns out that was a brittle system, and it's going to change really, really, really quickly.
Yeah.
Uh,
And to your point about on-prem thinking, so there's different. Cloud is a very broad term, right? You have infrastructure as a service where you
mhm.
stand up VMs, and yeah, you can forklift your on-prem workloads into the cloud, and it's extremely inefficient to do that, but you can in most cases. Then you have platform as a service where you have something like SQL Azure, where you get rid of your on-prem servers, but it's not an end user system. And then
Right.
you have software as a service, right, which is what M365 is for the most part. Um, the good news is that with SharePoint specifically, which is where we spend a lot of time, um, that's software as a service, and they are forced. You can't forklift those customizations, all those little custom apps that you built, because they don't work in SharePoint Online. It's a completely different
Yeah.
development model, right?
Right.
Um, and because you have to manage resource consumption so carefully in a multi-tenant scenario. So We've been fortunate in that firms have been required to rethink what they're doing, and it's forced us to have some interesting thoughts too. Like, okay, historically, the refresh cycle for a law firm intranet has been about 7 years. And you go, okay, well, why 7 years? And the reason is because that's when software goes out of support, right?
Mm.
So, you know, Windows Server 2012 and 2019, you got to replace it, right? Just in order to check the box on information security. You can't have stuff that's out of support. Well, okay, well, what's going to happen now that you're in SharePoint Online and it's never going to go out of date? Well, the thinking is as long as we do our jobs, there'll be customers practically forever, as long as we meet our commitments. Because
Right.
again, they don't like change, it's expensive, and you got competing priorities. So again, as long as we don't overcharge our customers and we do a good job, they should stick around for 10 plus years, no problem.
So let me people like change. I always remind people, well, remember when mobile phones came in? Now I'm old enough to remember that. It was massive change, disruption. People went for it. Why? Because it gave them some stuff that they really wanted and needed, like the ability to, talk anywhere and text, and then later on receive email, and now later on browsing. It was so powerful. It drove a lot of it, and people will do change, if they see, number one, if it's made smooth, the path is as smooth as possible for them. And number two, if they're getting a payoff. I taught my daughter to drive, and boy, do you ever realize, how hard it is to drive. All the things you need to, rules of the road, and how the engine, how the car works, and every, like, to change lanes is like 5 different steps, and she's literally trying to remember all the different steps. You and I just do it entirely naturally, and she was highly incented, as many, at least North American teenagers are, to learn. So people will learn, people will change, organizations will learn, will change, but it needs to be clear for them, what's in it for them, what's in it for the organization, what's in it for them, and you know one of the things that people miss in the what's in it for you in a law firm is that I would argue, the number one driver for behavior and the number one test that people apply to new technology is, how does this affect my status? Is this status enhancing or status neutral, or does this reduce my status? you know, if you do document automation in a firm, the lawyers always say, well, what are you you're taking, I have this front row relationship with the client. So now you're taking me out of that. You want me to be a data monkey where I'm doing like data input, like, wow, like, and I'm losing all these hours, and hours are the number one way that I keep score. Am I a successful lawyer? Well, more hours equals more revenue means I'm successful. And everybody in the whole firm plays the same game, looks at this, leaderboard, how many hours. So that's why things like document automation or any productivity enhancing thing tends to fall apart, because you need to offer those people an alternative. One firm that I work with, they offered, when they brought in document automation, a sort of packaged document automation tool for use for a certain kind of client. They said to lawyers, well, any hours that you bill for this client when you're using the document automation tool count 2 for 1. So you'll get less actual hours, but we'll count them at double the rate to take away that sting. And by the way, you now have two things. You're now giving your client a wonderful productivity enhancement that they're really going to appreciate. And number two, surprisingly, you now have a front row seat on a daily or weekly basis as to a core business activity that before you never had. But you can see what they're transacting, what they're doing. You're their front line for them to call and say, "Can you guys do this for us?" Anyways, that's how we try to shift that status question for lawyers. But that requires the firm to be pretty sophisticated in the new pricing model and the ability to, manage the compensation tweak. You're never going to blow up the compensate. You're never going to blow up hourly based billing. You're never going to blow up counting hours for associates and lawyers, but you can tweak them. And at some point, the tweaks become so many and so big that you've moved off of that model. That's my thought. But there's an innovation path. There is, if you go in and say we're going to blow everything up, you scare the hell out of people and you're not going to get anywhere. If you go in and say this makes sense to do and we're going to tweak it, and it's kind of like a Trojan horse. You're kind of saying, oh, look at this little tweak that we're going to do. It's not such a big tweak and it gets us these other advantages. And you know that it's actually, it's a gateway tweak that's going to lead to larger changes down the road. But that was always my strategy, was try to, try to package the change in a way that looked incremental, but you knew was actually transformative.
Yeah, and the leaderboards, that's an interesting concept. Daniel Pink wrote a book who I'm a big fan of called Drive
Yeah.
many years ago. And he talks about the motivations, like what motivates people to do things, in a professional setting. Money is actually much less of a driver, especially once you get over, the book is, I don't know, 15 years old at this point. So this number, I'm sure, is much higher now, but it was something around, on average, $80,000. Every incremental dollar is less effective until before that threshold.
Yeah.
But things that can be even more impactful than financial incentives are, respect and not letting your peers down, and in recognition, um, which in this scenario is, kind of what you're essentially gamifying a key metric, right? You got a leaderboard. Okay, who's got the most hours? Uh, and then autonomy is another one that, is a strong driver of performance and motivation. But yeah, it's that's an effective way to really incent people. And if they don't make their way up that leaderboard, you're pulling away from that. You're gonna face resistance.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Daniel Pink is great. The one I really rely on is a guy called David Rock, who developed what he called the SCARF model. And SCARF is an acronym for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and what's F? I can't remember what F is. But anyways, and the whole idea is, it comes from, we're much less thinking animals that feel and much more feeling animals that think. And that
Mm,
feeling is related to those psychosocial dynamics, of which, that's in ranked order, status, certainty, and, relatedness and autonomy. F is fairness. And so status and certainty, there's a guy, Storr is his name, wrote the book, The Status Game, a couple of years ago. And I thought it was really, he sort of said there's different ways, he basically said humans, once our physical needs are taken care of, are mostly about status. There's different frames for status. One frame of status is I'm the biggest and strongest, physically I can beat you and that gives me power and status. The other one is, and this, professionally, I'm the pinnacle of the profession. In law firms, that's either or a combination of the number of hours you're putting in and the amount of revenue you're generating is, the so-called rainmakers, or it's status amongst the professional community, right? Everybody
mm,
knows you're the best litigator for this kind of thing. And you absolutely have to, any change you're making, any change you're making, you're immediately pushing that certainty panic button and, and scaring people. So to the degree to which you can moderate that, and there are techniques for making people believe, as I said, oh, this is just an incremental change. We're going to partner with you to make the change. We'll hold your hand. There's ways to dampen down that certainty reaction. But certainly that status reaction, if you can do something that's status and make this thing status enhancing. And I think most of that is related to, clients And because lawyers are so highly client oriented, if you can sort of relate the thing that you're doing to enhancing their status related to their clients and client relationships. But it requires we go back to the leadership problem. You don't get to be a leader in a major law firm. You don't get to be a leader in a functional area within a law firm unless you're really, really, really good at, running the thing the way it is. IT directors, like CTOs, they get paid because there's 99.99% uptime for email and the DMS, and they've been able to manage the costs down.
Yeah.
And then you go to the guy and say, hey, let's go to the cloud and let's do this new thing and let's plug into the DMS and have this whiz bang going off there. And, that guy's thinking, typically it's a man, that, they're thinking, oh my God, what happens to my uptime, my reliability? What happens to, my costs? Because he is going to get it in the neck if anything crashes. So there's reasons why, we have this stasis, this rigidity that's built into it. And I think unfortunately, most senior partners kind of like, if they're aware, they kind of get that the current model ain't going to work, but they kind of hope that it's somebody else's problem. And
Yeah.
it ultimately will be. And unfortunately, you kind of hope that reality sits in and the change begins before it's cataclysmic. And there's some firms that are, I used to say, listen, I'm the innovation guy. Of course, I want to blow everything up and change everything. But if this firm did 3% change in the same direction consistently for 5 years, we would be light years ahead of most of our competitors. And it would
Yeah.
insulate us from the future that is coming. But it's very hard to maintain that consistency of amount of change and directionally.
Yeah, and I think it was Peter Drucker who said that, culture eats strategy for breakfast, and it's the culture in these firms that dictate. We used to, before I learned better, we used to sell into IT. IT was kind of our primary, ideal customer
Sure.
profile, and I
Yeah, it
quickly
made sense.
learned the dynamic that what you're talking about, which is that's not a lot of times the IT leaders are forced to play defense, right? That's, it's, hey, I want to manage uptime. I want to keep costs contained, and I don't want to piss anybody off in the process. And, that's really tough when you're selling a transformative piece of technology. Where does that fit in? It doesn't really, right?
It
Nowhere in
it,
there does that fit. So we lived it, and it was until we learned
well,
really where to sell
yeah,
it, we
but
it was tough.
who do you like? Who do you plug into then? Like the senior leadership either is a bit ostrich like, they see their job is to hold the fort, keep the firm running, not be too disruptive, and there's enough work to be done there. Like, there's always, things to be done and problems to be solved. And how do we improve the client feedback mechanism? And, new leases coming up for our headquarters. And what should we do about that? And, this group of partners seems to be disaffected. There's tons of stuff for, senior leaders to worry about. The IT budget is all spent on improving reliability, upkeep, and nowadays cybersecurity. You could
Hmm.
spend your entire IT budget simply to improve the existing set of capabilities. Keep it safer, keep it more secure, keep it more reliant. You could spend all of your money and have all your project resources devoted to that. I've seen that over and over again. There's very little left over. So, I kind of get it. So who do you sell to then? Or as an innovation leader within the firm, like quite often firms like, oh, we'll hire one guy, one person to do innovation, or a team of two or three people, and then the problem solved. Now we're going to be innovative because we have this little team who's chugging away, and if they're any good, yeah, they'll have some impact. uh, you know uh, Most of the time, you and I have talked about this before. What most people in firms are looking for is the theater of appearing to be changeful, because they know
Hmm.
clients are looking for that. I blame
Yeah.
the clients. Can we just talk about that for a second? Like, you
Yeah.
know, I came, uh, uh, when I came to law firms, I couldn't believe it that partners were sitting in their offices and not talking to clients. Like in other professional services firms, the main role of the partner is to get out and not just meet the clients for lunch, but to go to their offices and sit down with them and understand their business strategy and what their struggles were and what they needed, and to bring that back and help the firm either match capabilities to that need or develop new needs in order to do that. And most partner lawyers, most of the time, were working on deals or working on cases, and that surprised me. Um, and and if if the clients demanded more, like part of this, I wrote a blog post a couple of years ago saying, when clients, when more than 50% of the clients for, let's say, the Fortune 500 are measuring the quality of the legal services, the value for money that they're getting from the legal services, and they're doing that in some sort of quantitative way, that will be the tipping point, because market drives behavior change. Everybody likes to run the ship the way they like to run it. And we have basically we have a partnership based model for law firms, the client partner model, partner centered model, not client centered. Because if you actually spend time with clients and really listen to them, they want technology, they want it to be cheaper and faster. They have unmet needs that they would love their law firm to help them with. And clients, some of them more and more are developing. That's why you saw Clock has exploded. They're developing a greater sophistication, understanding what legal services they need, where they're getting them from, managing them better, measuring the value. And as that accelerates through, that will be the major driver of change within law firms. Other than occasionally you get, brilliant, senior partners who have a vision and are able to drive drive it ahead of the curve. But most firms, most of the time, will shift once clients put more pressure on them. And you want to be in the firm that's just slightly smarter than your peer group of law firms, that understands what clients need a little bit better and are a little bit ahead of the curve. You don't have to be that smart. You just have to be a little bit smarter.
Yeah, yeah, and I know we're running out of time here, but one thing I'll end with is um, what's interesting. I agree with everything that you just said in terms of client demands. I've actually seen resistance at some of the white shoe New York law firms on initiatives like Sally,
Yeah,
and the reason is because it gives the clients the ability to objectively compare outcomes,
sure.
right? If I can
Yeah,
go pay $600 an hour to a firm in Westchester, Pennsylvania, and get the same outcomes that I can with a white shoe New York City law firm, um, maybe I make some different buying decisions. And yeah, it's there's you know um, Damien
Mar-
Real.
market market transparency
Mhm.
will drive a lot of behavior. That's certainly one of the challenges. Um, and that, again, given the fragmentation in the market and the lack, I mean, lawyers would say, well, everything's really, really complicated, and we can't standardize it at all. And I
Mhm.
would say, well, if you worked at it, you could probably, have a standard understanding for about 80% of the work. The
Mhm.
Pareto principle really, really works. About 80% of most work that most firms are doing, you could kind of chunk it out, and you could more or less, plus or minus 10%, know what the work is going to be ahead of time. And you know what work's going to go into it, and you know what's going to come out of the other end. And we're going to get to that point. And when we do, clients will have a much more clarity on value for money, price point stuff. And there will always be very high end, bet the shop litigation, or super complex deal, or you know the like, that will be where that can't apply. But you can even chunk out parts of that, and clients will more and more insist on it. But if you were a tailor back in the 1800s, and somebody set up a garment factory next to you, you would sort of say, well, no one can ever produce the quality of suits that I'm producing. Like, so anyways, that's probably a bit of an unfair comparison, but um, the combination of generative AI and other technology capabilities, including the cloud and Microsoft 365, with clients needing more legal services but having fewer resources or limited legal spending to do it, will ultimately, drive change in the market.
Yeah.
That is going to be very powerful. But is that a 2 year or 5 year or 10 year thing? I don't know. It depends on the nature of your practices and your geography, and IT. Large IT corporate clients tend to be more sophisticated with this stuff, not surprisingly. Um, uh, you know, uh, so, I mean, if anyone's listening out there, form a coalition with your mid-career partners to, undergo a thought process about, what do clients need, and where are the clients going to be in 5 years from now, and how could we be just slightly more proactive at meeting clients in terms of not just what their current needs are, which is like, bring me this litigation or draft this contract for me, but like, as a service delivery provider, what kind of services do clients need? How do they want it to be consumed? And I think it's the mid-career, partners uh, in some sort of facilitated process to get there. And the second thing is, you need to start small scale efforts to change. Somebody has an idea. Oh, we should have a client portal to do this for these clients. Well, figure out a way to spin up one or two or three of them and test it out. You might lose your shirt on the pricing on the first or second one, but you'll figure it out by the third one, and you'll start making on the fourth one, and you'll be able to extend it to other clients and other practice areas. And like, if you don't try some experiments and learn, number one, that change is fun and not as hard as you think it is, and number two, it can be profitable, if not from a direct dollar sense, but in terms of that client relationship. Those are my two big, free, advice for any innovation leaders or any partners out there, or any managing partners. Ted, what would you add to that, or what would you counter?
Well, no, I completely agree with you. And as I'm sitting here looking, you and I had a list of things we wanted to talk about. We didn't really get into a portion of the agenda, but man, I would love to have you back. This has been a super fun
Oh,
conversation, and I would love to have you back. I think we were going to talk about smarter organizations, but we don't have time today. Maybe let's tee up another conversation down the road to
sure.
dig into
Ted,
something.
I love talking about this stuff. You and I are so simpatico on
Hmm.
it. Yeah, no, anytime, happy to come back. Yeah, it is amazing how similar, you know, organizations are in wanting to keep doing what they did yesterday and having people sit comfortably within their silos. And, my pitch for that, if you have me back, would be, in a volatile, uncertain, and complex world, what you need, you still need to run those silos, and you still need to optimize within silos, but you also need to look at new emerging challenges and opportunities and make decisions about unknowable things across those silos. And that's the challenge for every organization, how to do that, how to keep the plane flying while kind of redesigning parts of it at the same time. And I like to think I have some ideas for how to do that, and I've done some of those things, and it's not as it's not as hard as people think it is. Change can be fun.
Yeah. Well, good. Let's get together again and have that conversation. I'd love to do it. But in the meantime, I really appreciate you coming on, and I had a lot of fun as always when we chat. And yeah, let's get something on the calendar and do it again.
Sounds great. Thanks, Ted. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content. Want to dive deeper into the world of legal innovation? Connect with us online at getinfo-.com, where you'll find additional resources and articles. You can also follow us on social media at getinfo- to stay updated on the latest news and insights in the field of legal tech and knowledge management. Once again, thank you for joining us today on Legal Innovation Spotlight, a fireside chat series hosted by Info-.